Right. Welcome, everybody. I've got Alexis Haselberger with me here, and Alexis is a productivity coach, time management coach that really focuses on people's productivity. And so, welcome, Alexis.
Thanks for having me, Andy. Good to talk to you again.
Yeah, good to talk to you. I think it was 2000s. I think it was 2017 when we last talked here. I know you and I have talked frequently since, but
Yeah. I think you might be right.
yeah, 3 years goes by quick. And so one thing I wanted to talk about, because we really are kind of in a unique situation, especially since we last talked. Last time we talked a lot about kind of time management and productivity and things like that. But I want to talk about the current situation. And, if we could talk maybe around the different things that you're experiencing or personally experiencing, you could throw those in too. But some of the things that maybe you're finding, like some of your clients are experiencing, and different things that you're finding, either challenges or things that you can put in place.
Yeah. So, I think like everybody else, 4 months ago, the world turned and my clients started having a completely different yet related set of challenges, right? Which became a number of things. How do I work from home with my kids here, with my partner here, with my spouse here? How do I go from having boundaries that I used to have so easily at work that are built in to not having any boundaries at all? And what do I do with that? I also, work with a lot of teams. And so there's just been a lot of stuff around, okay, how do we collaborate remotely? How do I manage my team remotely? How can I resist becoming a micromanager when that's all I want to do is know exactly what's going on and how many hours people are working? So those are a lot of the challenges that I've been helping people with. It's both on the kind of, boundaries and the professional meets personal. And now we've got no boundaries and we're all in the same space. And it's also on the real work side of things. So how are things working? How are we working as a team? How are we able to still get things done? How do we not lose, how do we not have the isolation of working from home and, only talking to our coworkers about work things all the time, right? And never having that chit chat in the kitchen, things like that.
It's interesting because a lot of those challenges were challenges that people had before, like a lot of the tactical type of challenges, but now it's things that they've now moved into their home or whatever kind of remote office they're trying to use, or if they're still going to the office, but they've got their employees or their customers or whatever working someplace else. It's kind of now probably magnified a lot of the challenges that they once had, and probably figured out ways to manage it. But just kind of magnified every single
Yeah.
issue.
I think you're totally right, right? It's not like I've had to start teaching a completely different set of things, right? It's very much a lot of the same strategies, but it's about coming at things slightly differently and knowing that like there are different challenges. So for instance, right, when we're in the workplace, we have distractions, right? When we're at the office, there's your coworker that doesn't have an inside voice. There's, the fact that you're in an open office and you can't ever get a little space for yourself. There's all these things. There's distractions. And then you go home, there's still distractions. They're just different distractions, right? Now it's your dog that needs your attention and needs to go outside. Or it's your kids who are constantly knocking on, the bathroom door where you're now working to get a little privacy or whatever it is. And so it's not that like the concepts have changed, but you're right. It's everything is magnified, and in some ways, like everybody's having the same challenges, but also it's magnified the differences in some ways, right? Because, people who have young children at home, this is a very different experience that they're having than people who are single or people who live with roommates and things like that. And so it's really saying, what are all these challenges and how are they kind of tilted now that you're in a different space, and what do we do about that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I want to talk about something, because this is something that I experienced, and I'll forget about it when we start kind of talking about some other topics. But when my son was little, he's almost 16.
Mm-hmm.
But when he was like 3 or 4 years old, I had an office in my basement, and what we had to do, he would just keep coming down and wanting to talk with me. And so what we had to do eventually was put a stop sign on the door to the basement, where if it was red, he wasn't allowed to go down. If it was green,
Mm-hmm.
he was allowed to go down, because there was many times I'd be on a conference call and he would sneak in, of course, like any 3 or 4 year old can do.
Right.
And I realized he's sitting at my feet,
Right.
and, quiet, or he could just might come straight in, and it was during a time where we didn't have a lot of like Zoom calls or
Right.
Teams meetings and things like that. So it wasn't a lot of face type of activity. so I know I've had the ability to kind of build that in, and my kids are kind of used to me working at home because I work a lot at home. But I do know those challenges that can come. And that the one thing that I've had, not even just the logistics thing, it's the role, right? And I think my kids still struggle with that role of saying, I work at the office, and you're in a different role than you are at home. And that kind of, there isn't much space. There's not a lot of feet between where you're working and where your family is.
Right.
So what are kind of some suggestions around even switching from just being that worker, especially if you're a manager, or you're trying to solve a complex problem and you're kind of in a different headspace than being a mom or a dad now has to make a peanut butter sandwich for their 5-year-old.
Right. Yeah. So I think that there's a few things that I'm going to come back to this, but I think what you've said too about the stop sign is really key, right? And that's something that you figured out a long time ago. But I think this is something that, like, signage is making all the difference, right? This is something that we started doing too. As soon as this all happened, we sat down with our family and I said, okay, well, we're going to need to know when not to bother each other, right? My kids are 9 and 11, so they're on their own Zoom calls and things like that. And so at first we printed out a schedule that was just me and my husband, and here's when our meetings are. It wasn't like one of these crazy color-coded schedule. It was just one color, red when you can't come in. It was like times on one side, names on the top, red when you can't come in. And then what we realized too is that, like, not only did we need that, but that our kids needed that.
See, this is what I mean.
Exactly. This is the world we're living. Oh, I can't hear you anymore.
Sorry, I put him on mute. This wasn't planned, actually.
Oh,
the dog was scratching,
exactly.
and so she let me in, and so she came to join. So
I
have to go, baby. Okay. No, thanks.
Try, it's really good. I just made it.
Okay, it's okay.
So just try.
Okay, thank you. I'll keep it. Okay.
So try some.
Okay. Delicious. Okay. Okay, thank you.
Slow roll over.
Okay, stop. Okay. Can you close the door, honey? Thank you. And it reminds me of that probably the most famous one with that one gentleman. I think he was in
BBC Dad.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I keep hearing we're all BBC Dad now, right?
That's right.
But
exactly.
But yeah, I mean, I think that the signage is really key, because what we realized too is that, our kids need it, because I busted in on I just went in to check on one of my kids because I was on a break from meetings, and I come in and I go into his room and I'm looking, and he's like, "Get out, I'm on a science class right now," and then I realized, okay, my children are humans too.
Yeah.
They also need we now need a schedule up for everybody. And so I think that, like, that's a really key mode for, like, saying, okay, when we're in meetings, we're definitely in worker role. And when we're not in meetings, we might be in worker role, we might be in parent role, but in really trying to say, okay, what does the schedule look like every day? And when am I going to be available for you? And when am I not going to be available for you? Mm-hmm. And then saying, okay, well, having to, if you're like me, you're a person who really likes to segment work and home. And so this has been a little harder, even though I've always worked from home. I haven't always worked from home with my kids. Mm-hmm. But saying things like, okay, well, I'm going to take a longer break during the middle of the day, during lunchtime. Usually I would just eat lunch at my desk and not really worry about it. But I'm actually going to say, I'm going to take a half an hour. I'm going to go out. I'm going to be with the kids. I'm going to give them the attention they need, because I don't know if you've experienced this, but when you spend some uninterrupted time with your kids, just like you're there and you're not on your phone and not trying to do work, they tend to leave you alone more the other times, right?
That's right. Exactly. That's right. Yeah. They kind of have and it's kind of like, they're a little depleted because we've been ignoring them. Yeah. And then, once we give them a little bit of attention, then they're good for a little while. In fact, sometimes they don't even want us around after that. So. Right.
And so, like, I think that has been really key, is just being really open and about what we need and when we need it. And I don't know, like, for me, these schedules have worked really well. I knew they were working when, like, the first week of quarantine, I heard whispering outside my office door, and it was like, "Don't knock. It says she's in a meeting." And I was like, yes, this is working, Yeah. I mean, and of course we have older children who can read, and that's a totally different story than if you've got, I would say, kids who are younger, elementary, babies, toddlers, et cetera. For that, we need different strategies.
Mm-hmm. That's right. Yeah. And that's why we use the stop sign. And the stop sign actually was a red stop sign, which is a
Right.
normal stop sign, but the other side was a green.
Right.
It was a shape of a stop sign, but it was green. But it was just like, okay, even though he at that time he could maybe he could read stop and go,
Yeah.
but he definitely could tell the difference between red and green. So
Right.
it was his trigger. So
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And I think, I mean, it's just kind of like how for adults, the universal signage of don't talk to me is when you're wearing headphones,
that's
right?
right.
Even if you're
Exactly.
listening to nothing at all.
That's right. Exactly. Yeah, that's right. So what are some thoughts around just shifting? Because I know, like, for myself, and it kicked into me when I
Yeah.
was much younger, when my son was much younger, where he would say, "You look mad," or "What are you angry about?"
Hmm.
We take on different appearances when when we're trying to solve a problem, or when we're at work, we accept certain sort of like rudeness and abruptness that we may not want in our household.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I think shifting, so what's been really important for me and for the people that I've been working with is thinking about, not that we're going to have the same boundaries that we had before, but really thinking about how do you make the transition from home to work mode at the beginning of the day? And then how do you make that same transition from work mode to home mode at the end of the day? Right. And so that you are really pretending like there's two separate spaces. And so I think we can do this in a number of ways. I talk a lot about space boundaries and time boundaries. And so one of those is like in the morning, don't roll out of bed and just immediately start checking emails on your phone, right? Like get up, get some coffee, go get breakfast with your kids, like have a little bit of a buffer before your mind immediately starts thinking about it. Because as well as everyone knows, right? The second you pick up that phone and you start looking at the emails, doesn't matter if you're answering them or not, that's where your mind is, right?
Right.
And you're not able to be present there, right? It can help. I know this is kind of silly, but to have a fake commute where you say, okay, I just like my morning commute is that I walk out of the house, I walk around the block, and I come back and I go directly to wherever I'm working. And like that's my commute. And it sounds very silly, but it trains your brain to say like, okay, I'm moving from one space to the other. I think we can do similar things, like maybe around breaks or lunchtime when we're going to be spending time with our kids, is just even just 2 minutes of, I'm going to sit here and just deep breathe for a couple of minutes before I make that shift. Or I am going to read one article of the 50 open tabs on my browser, just like something to transition you from thinking about the work problems to thinking about something else. And then at the end of the day, having a similar sort of transition. For a lot of people, this is around exercise. And, it's really funny because I remember when I was a kid, my dad would come home from work every day, like 6 p.m., and he would not say hi to anybody. He would go right upstairs, and this was the 80s, so he had a Nordic track, and he would be on the Nordic track for 30 minutes, and then he would come downstairs, and he would say hi to everybody, and then the night would start. And like, when I was a kid, I used to be really annoyed by this. I was like, why doesn't he say hi to like what's going on? Then I learned, no. He is like taking care of his mental health
Right.
so that he can talk to us later, right? So that he can be present. And so even though we don't have those, the commute and all of that, I think doing a little exercise or reading a book for 15 minutes or listening to your podcast, just doing something that is, enjoyable or useful or productive to you that isn't about work can help you make that mental transition.
Yeah, I like that. I like that. Yeah, and one thing I think that I mean, I didn't really think of it until like as we're talking right now, but like I grew up in the country, so we grew up, with a lot of farmers, and the farm kids always tended to have very strong work ethics.
Right.
Not everyone, but most of them did, and usually I think we kind of credit that to just the fact that there was a lot of work to do, which I think is probably partly. But I think the other part is that they would see their parents, their mom or dad or whoever was running the farm. They would actually see them working.
Mm-hmm.
Where I think today, I mean, I think even the factory, back when, when people went to a factory, they knew what was coming out. So they'd see mom or dad going to the factory and they're producing whatever widget they're producing. And the kids would see that. They would know what they're doing. They would have some pride in that.
Mm-hmm.
Where now people go and they work for the telephone company, or they work for the city, or they work for a computer company or whatever. And nobody really knows what they do. And in fact,
Right.
a lot of the terms are even vague, right? I'm administrative assistant, or I'm a consultant, or
Right.
I'm a corporate lawyer. Okay, what nobody knows what any of this stuff. Nobody knows what these things do.
Right.
So the kids can't really tie work. And so I think this is an opportunity for people to be able to tie their effort, and their kids are able to see it, you know, maybe not sitting with them, but they're able to see the fact that, yeah, mom or dad they do work all day. They, you know,
Right.
they are, and they're trying to juggle a lot. So
Yeah, you bring up a really good point there. And also, I think it's kind of funny because I've started to realize that my kids are now just like to make fun of me, just quoting me and the things that I say to my clients, right? Because, you know, I tend to say a lot of the same things over and over again. And now my kids will just start ribbing me and quoting back to me things that they hear me saying to my clients.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, they pick that up, right? And
Yeah,
that's, I think it's a good thing, but I think it also shows we could also catch some things that we probably are doing that, you know, some probably bad habits, but it also shows
right.
that they are watching what we're doing. And I think that children want to see what we're doing. They're really interested in. I think that separation, you know, which again, I do think that we're in the information age, but we still operate like it's the industrial age.
Right.
And I think this shift, I think what's going on now has kind of just made that very apparent where, you know, if we were back in the industrial age and this thing hit, you know, we wouldn't have been able to make cars or cabinets or whatever we were making. Now, because we're in the information age, we're able to do it from home, but people have such hangups because they want to see it. They want to, what are you doing? And they want to have more control, just like it was we were working in a factory.
Right.
But I think that there's still that ability for our family members to see exactly what we're doing. We're not just going to the office, having coffee,
Right.
meeting for lunch and
Yeah.
having, you know, whatever. So
Yeah. And
it's not like Mad Men, right?
Right. Right. Yes. We're not having 3 martini lunches.
That's right.
Yeah. I mean, I think we should also probably point out too, that we're coming at this from a particularly privileged point of view, right? That there are many, many people out there who are still in jobs that are essential workers and things like that, where, you know, the problems that we're talking about right now are just very different problems that they're having, you know?
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's what I know when people start talking about things like, you know, this is unprecedented times and things like that. I try to go back, I look back to World War II as an example. And I think of, I look at, you know, if we were living here, it would be one scenario, like here meaning North America, it's one scenario. But if we were in Europe, you know, we're operating in a completely different scenario where, you know, if I think of Anne Frank or someone like that, who, you know, lived in an attic for 2 years,
right,
for other people, it's a completely different scenario than what we have to experience now. So,
yeah,
you know, I try to tie that in. However, there are people who lost their job, and there are people who are still trying to manage this kind of invisible enemy, and they're trying to figure out how to make that work in their current situation. And most of those jobs were already high stress to begin with.
right, right. And now they're even more so. Yeah. Yeah. I keep thinking of the saying, same storm, different boat.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So most of what I'm finding with, especially with time management is, I think for people who, of course, the common thing I'm hearing is that individuals don't, you know, they're struggling with trying to get going during the day, or they find days just kind of run on and they're not really getting a whole lot of productivity done, or they're doing what feels like a whole bunch of menial tasks.
Yeah.
So what are some thoughts on people just trying to focus down more and just being able to get those, you know, get the work done and kind of be a little more focused, where I think, you know, when they're at the office, there might've been a lot more pressure to try to keep to task.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is the time to really reevaluate our priorities, right? And say, okay, if you, and you know, I always espouse this concept called task realism, right? Which is like, I've got this many hours in the day, I've got this stuff that needs to get done. Is it realistically going to happen? Because if it's not, then I need to pare down what I need to do, because I can't create more hours in the day, right? And so I think that part of it is about saying, okay, what are the things, if I look at my work task list and I look at my home task list, like what are the things that are the must-dos? What are the things that absolutely have to be done? And you actually you want to do those first, right? So do those in the beginning part of the day, because then if all goes to hell throughout the rest of the day, then you're okay. You don't have to pull an all-nighter, right? But I think what we often do is the opposite. We're like, well, I'll just answer emails and I will do all the quote easy stuff. And we never make time for those kind of must-do things. And so I think it's kind of identifying on your task list, what are the things where, you know what, if I don't do this today, bad news tomorrow, right? versus the things where, if I get to it aspirationally, that's going to be great. But if I don't, it's really not the end of the world. And I think that we can do that on a home perspective and on a work perspective. On a home perspective, it's like, do the kids need to be fed? Yes, they do, right? Does the house need to be spotless? No, it doesn't, right? From a work perspective, it's like, do I need to get this proposal out to the client? 100%. Does my inbox need to be at 0? Probably not.
Right. Yeah. Well, I think and I thought about this today because as we're kind of leading into our appointment, I had a little bit of time and I was kind of going through some email, and what hit me was that I think we use social media, and I throw kind of email in with social media as a method of having external controls over really telling us what we need to do. So, I think we've been very conditioned to say, okay, my boss wants this and they want it by this afternoon. This time is unmanageable, but I don't want to be yelled at, or I don't want to have to stay to the evening. So I'm going to focus and get it done and get this completed. And we're kind of, many of us rely on this external kind of pressure and deadlines to get our work done. And I think we've sometimes shifted to looking for social media to tell us, and even if it's just, oh, I got a Facebook message or I've got an email, well, that tells me I'm supposed to do something versus saying, is this really important? Is this something that has to be done now?
Yeah.
And even sometimes making that decision ahead of time by not even going into those tools.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I always call email and Slack and all that other stuff other people's priorities, right? But it is really interesting what you point out because, in my coaching program, one of the exercises that I used to have people do right at the beginning was, hey, just spend the first hour of your day working on whatever the most important thing is. Like, don't check your email, don't do anything until after that. And I actually had to move that exercise from after the first session to after the third session, because what I was finding was that people didn't know what the most important thing was, right? And so people were saying to me, but how can I know what to do if I don't look at my email, right? And I'm very much about making that shift in agency to, okay, let's know what all the things are on our plate. And email it's helpful, right? There's stuff you have to do in there, but what you want to be able to do is say, is this email that's asking me to do something, is it more important than the things that I'm supposed to be doing today? Or is it less important and I need to slot it in for later, right? And if we don't kind of have that understanding of what do we got on our plate and what's the relative priority of everything, then email and Slack and all of these things just becomes this rabbit hole that you can never catch up to because it's coming, it just comes forever. And also that prevents you from getting the important stuff done.
Right. Yeah. Well, I like that. And I think that one thing I've come to the realization here over the last couple of years is that the people that are extremely successful, they have either not accepted the role or they have resigned from the role at some point about worrying about everybody else. So, if they don't worry, like if they've got a 13-year-old kid in the house, they expect a 13-year-old to be able to go feed themselves. Yeah. And they have really trained that child to say, look, I'm not making you a sandwich. You're old enough to do that yourself. Because they really have said, I'm moving on to focus on my things versus, worrying, is there enough gas in the car for my 17-year-old who's driving? Well, he'll figure it out. She'll figure it out. Right. Yeah. Do they know how to spend? Like, there's certain things that they've just moved to. And I've realized that, the pro athlete, they aren't skipping their workout to make sure that, somebody else in the house who's supposed to be responsible for themselves did what they were supposed to. They just, they do, and it's not so much they're self-centered. They have just, again, resigned from the role of parenting, adult, grown-up toddlers, basically.
Right. I think that's totally true. And this is making me feel much better about the fact that every year on January 1st, we give our kids more chores. That's one of our traditions. But I think you're totally right. I mean, I think, when I think about a lot of the people that I work with and the things that I've been seeing on social media and things like that, my kids they're 9 and 11. They're not, of course, we're not perfect parents, like far from it. Right. But, my kids can make a meal. They can do their own laundry. What happens when they don't have clean underwear? Well, then they wear dirty underwear for a day until they do their laundry. Right. And so it's kind of, my goal is like, one, I did a lot of work at the beginning and now it's their turn. But also, like, I don't want to have kids who show up at college and don't know how to do laundry. Right. and are the ones asking other people. And I think that you make a really valid point that like part of this also is about being able to focus on our own priorities, right? I probably wouldn't have been able to start a business a few years ago if my kids still needed me to butter their bagels.
Right. That's right. Exactly. Yeah. And I think that, I think it is for a lot of people, I think they have to, in fact, I woke up one day and just said to myself, look, it wasn't even about anybody else. It's about myself.
Yeah.
And saying, look, you need to take responsibility for yourself and the things that you're not doing, Andy. And it's not, not that I was blaming anybody for, okay, I had to do this or that, but I think, there were periods in my life where I was blaming other people, even if it wasn't outward, it was in my head. Oh, I can't get this done because of this. And, once you take responsibility, then you have to say, look, there's only one person that's responsible to do that. That's me. And if I'm responsible to get the things that I need to get done, well, somebody else has to get their thing done too. And it's not my job to be, the one who jumps in every single time there's a problem. Or somebody's hungry, well, find something to eat,
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think that comes back to kind of my central philosophy of life, which is the only thing we can control is our own actions and reactions.
Yeah.
Right. Like we don't get anything else, but we have a whole lot of control over those.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. One thing. So I was listening to a guy named Jordan Peterson, and he's a psychologist. He's from Canada. And one of the big things, so he's, I think somebody who he's one of those love-hate kind of guys that either people kind of follow because he's got some kind of different views. But one of the things that when I was listening to him, he talked a lot about vulnerability. And he was really talking, which kind of hit me because he talked about the fact that, and he used the concept of Adam and Eve. And so and he just said, when Adam and Eve realized that they had to take care of themselves, one of the big thing was that they realized they were vulnerable. And I think that what occurred to me was that when we realize we're vulnerable, and what I mean by vulnerable, meaning that we don't know where our income's coming from next year.
Right.
And even if somebody has a job, I think even this current state is challenging everybody's belief that, hey, I'm safe, or hey, I've got a safe job or a protected job, or a great career. So I'll be fine. It's always worked out, to being, hey, I don't know what the future looks like.
Right.
So I better start to make choices. And I think that vulnerability has kind of made people either try to hang on to what they have in the sense of like not accept the fact that things are changing, or just kind of start to kind of make a lot of kind of rash decisions. But I was just, so it occurred to me about even like time management, how we have to accept our vulnerability with time management and realize it's the scarcest resource really we have.
Right. And I think, it's interesting. I can't say I support Jordan Peterson and his views, but, and far from it, but I will say that, I think you're right in that people are saying like, okay, do I have any control here? And what do I do about it? And then making crazy decisions. And it's, it's actually something that I see play out, I'll just give you an example. So people all over the world all the time will get some gusto around, like, I'm going to download this task app. I'm going to put all my tasks in it. And I'm going to do it. Right. And then what happens, right? Like they do it for a little while. And then this is what I always hear. Things got busy and I stopped using my system. Right. And it's kind of like, actually, what you want to do in times of crisis is to double down on your system, because when we're making decisions all the time, we have decision fatigue, and decision fatigue means that we're making worse decisions over time. And so you actually want to kind of rely back on your system. And so people will tell me like, well, it just got too busy and I couldn't use it. And it's like, well, how do you know you're working on the right thing then? Right. You're now like, what we revert to is the email comes and I do it. Right. The Slack message comes and I do it. Social media tells me this. Right. And I think that actually, if we would double down and say like, no, we're just going to keep on keeping on with what we're doing, that actually allows you the mental space to be able to make better decisions for yourself. Right. It's kind of like the economy, right? It's like, I had friends probably like you did who when this first set, they were like, we got to sell everything, right? Get out of the stock market. And I said, as I always do, I said, no, I never touch it. Like that's my investing. I just never touch it. Right. Yeah. And, I've now been thinking about some of those people and thinking like, God, I hope they didn't sell it all, because that's never, like, economists will tell you, it's never the right move.
Right. That's right.
Right?
Yeah.
It feels like it because it feels so scary and you feel like you have to. I think that's maybe what it comes down to, right? When things feel scary, you feel like you have to do something, anything, right? And that can feel like the right thing, but you don't have enough mental space to say, okay, let's look at this in this full scope of things, right?
That's right. Yeah. Well, and that's always the interesting thing about fear is that fear drives three responses. It's fight or flight, but the other one is freeze.
Mm-hmm.
And often people will look at they'll look at somebody's actions and say they're either in one space or another.
Right.
But somebody choosing not to do something isn't the same as freezing, or someone choosing to be, I talk about fighting in the sense of, okay, I'm going to get up early tomorrow. I'm going to tackle this problem. It's a form of fighting versus I'm going to fight the system or a system or fight something. I'm going to distract myself and look for other places to just waste my time or waste, people who are, again, are causing problems in their own neighborhoods or fighting with neighbors or whatever the situation is.
Mm-hmm.
Isn't probably a very good waste of time or use of time when they really should be investing in themselves. So I think that when people are afraid, they kind of make kind of crazy decisions versus someone who says, no, I'm purposely going to hold back. Almost like, well, I'll tell you probably a bad analogy. I'm afraid of dogs, especially big dogs. And it wasn't until somebody who's a friend of mine, and her dad was a police officer, and she said, well, police officers are taught to just stand their ground, just stand there, right? Not stand their ground, literal, but I mean, stand where you're at, and you don't make any aggressive moves, and you don't run away. When I realized I did that, what happened was I'm still afraid, but I'm not showing the actions of somebody who's afraid. So the dog just comes up and stops. But I'm making the conscious choice to do that. I'm not frozen. I'm making the conscious choice to stand still, which is different than freezing. But I think, so I think this whole period, I think, is signs of people either showing fear or having some sort of plan in place.
Right. And I think too that you can have both, right? Like you can be afraid, just as you said, and still be in control of your actions and reactions, right? Like, because we don't get to choose our emotions. Right. We're going to have those regardless. There's are you familiar with the psychologist, I believe her name is Susan David? One thing that I love is she talks about emotions and she calls it what the funk. And she's like, what's the function of your emotion, right? Mm-hmm. So it's like, okay, you're having an emotion. Let's just say right now, you're really lonely, you're isolated. Well, what's the function of that emotion? That emotion is telling you, you need to go seek other people, right? Whether that's in Zoom calls or whatever. And so what I like about that is it turns that feeling that could make you freeze into something that you can actually do something about, right? It's taking it from it into an action perspective.
Right. Yeah, I like that. And I think that's one thing going into this. I'm an extrovert. So for me, I really need connection with other people. And when I'm, let's say, having coffee or being around other people, if they're meaningful relationships, that's really kind of what I need. But I've realized that because of my job, I would travel a lot and things like that. So I've realized over the years, talking on the phone or having some other method of being able to connect with people was good. But I do know people who are really challenged right now because they really haven't built up those skills. Likewise, somebody who's more of an introvert is kind of thinking, hey, this is great. I like being home. But there's another side, which is kind of like sliding into a reclusive type of behavior, right? Versus really, like you said, being really aware of their emotions and saying, what am I feeling? Why am I feeling that? And what should I really do about that?
Right. And it's interesting. So although nobody ever believes me, I'm a total introvert. and so it actually took me about 8 weeks of being in quarantine before I was like, I might like to see some other people, right? Like for the first 8 weeks, I was like, well, this is kind of great. I don't have to go anywhere on the weekends. Like nobody's expecting anything of me. But then also, I have one of my kids is an extreme extrovert. And, he had the opposite problem. It's like he was getting so tired in those first few days because he just wasn't getting energy from other people. And, I think we've both had to make adjustments, right? He's had to do more Zoom play dates and things like that. And, I've had to, now that I do want to see people again, but I've also just had to be like, well, sometimes it's even too much to just be around your own family all the
Right.
time, right?
That's right.
And sometimes I'll be like, okay, I'm just going to go in the other room and read my book and like be totally alone, right? And you just have to kind of roll with it to be able to say, well, this is not a situation that's forever, but we do have to continue. I'm always talking about, or at least I'm now always talking about this formula of communicate, experiment, iterate, communicate, and you just keep going, right? Because things keep changing, even though it seems like nothing changes. It seems like we've been inside for 10 years now, but things really do keep changing every day, and we have to keep working together to make sure that everything's out in the open, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and I think of it, I grew up in Canada, so I think you grew up in Wisconsin, right?
No, I grew up outside of Seattle.
Okay.
But, my sister's a Canadian now.
Because, I think of this as kind of being like one big snow day. And no, I'm kind of, I don't want to minimize this, but when it first started, I thought, we're kind of stuck in, and now living in Arizona, it's a little bit different because, we can go outside and our climate's a little bit more being able to be outside. So we were able to kind of send the kids outside earlier than some other areas,
right.
but you're right, like things change, but it's a matter of, us constantly like you said, doing these iterations and figuring out how we actually function, because things are changing quickly. And so, laws are changing, local laws sometimes, or, statutes at least, or, certain things are going in place or being removed, and just trying to figure out how we can be more fluid and flexible as these things come in and go out.
Yeah. And I think there's, it's interesting. There's three questions that we've been using in our family all the time, and that I've been talking to people about. You use these at work too. And it's so simple. It's just what's working well that we can double down on, what's not working very well, and then what are we going to try to fix it, right? And so like this applies to basically everything in home life. It also applies to like your team and communication's not working that well. Okay, what can we try this week to fix it? Let's try it. Let's evaluate it. Did it work? Did it not work? Maybe it kind of worked and we need to tweak it a little bit. But it's like, if we can just keep asking ourselves these three questions in whatever groups we're in, then we're going to continue to make progress, and everyone's going to feel heard. Because you can say, okay, actually my Wi-Fi at home is really bad. Oh, my boss needs to know that so that he could help me with that, or, things like that, which I think we might feel like, oh, I don't want to bring these things up. I don't want to be the person that's, like always asking for things, or I don't want to be the kind of, squeaky wheel and things like that. But if as leaders, we can say, no, it's our job to figure this stuff out and to keep the conversation going, then I think everyone benefits.
Yeah, I like that. So one thing I wanted to maybe we'll start wrapping up here, but one of the things that I know going into this, and I didn't know how long we were going to end up being like in this kind of being challenged here with COVID, but I kind of have a feeling that there's going to be kind of two people coming out of this. One is a person who's coming out stronger than they were when they went in, and people who aren't. And I don't think anybody's going into this and coming out in the same state. I think that there's just too many changes and too many challenges that people are going to just say, hey, I went in, this way, and I'm coming out exactly the same way. I think that there's too many challenges. I don't know if you agree with that, but.
Yeah, I think like we're all on a scale somewhere, but I think that it's kind of like when you're approached with any sort of adversity, right? It's kind of like that, they say about kids that it's like the orchid and the dandelion, right? That like they can have the same set of experiences, and one will be more resilient, right? And one needs more care, right? And so I think that, if we are, the I don't know, maybe I'm getting the wrong flowers, but like, if we're the flower that needs more care and we aren't giving it to ourselves now, and we haven't figured out ways to make that happen, then we might be coming out worse. If we are someone who is already pretty resilient and we have just kind of, worked with it and gone with the flow, then we're probably going to come out having learned a lot more things about ourselves and even more resilience. And then there's kind of that third one where maybe we're the flower that does need a lot more care, but we figured out the ways to give it to ourselves, right?
I like that. I like that. So is there any kind of final tips or anything that you want to share with everybody before?
Yes. So I'm going to give you like one tip that is something that I do every day. I have all my clients do long before COVID, and I think it's even more important now. It's one of the best things we can do. And this is just to plan your tomorrow at the end of today. Like, in order to be mentally present with your family, in order to have a transition, spend the last 15 minutes of your quote workday, whatever that is, looking at what you accomplished, what you didn't, looking at your calendar for tomorrow, doing a brain dump of anything that's still in your head about work, open questions, things you're working on, etc., and making a plan for tomorrow. Because what that will do is, one, it allows you to kind of avoid the activation energy required to just get started the next day, which I know a lot of people are having a problem with, but it also allows you to mentally disconnect from work in a way that just isn't possible if your to-do list is still running and you haven't made a plan for the next day.
I like that. Yeah. I've always realized that my following day goes much better when I plan the night before.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's probably two reasons why. One, I think my subconscious is still working on it. But
Right.
the other thing is when I get up, I just start tackling it. And so the day just seems to go much better. So.
Right. Yeah. You don't have to sit there thinking, what should I do next? And which thing is more important, right? You've
right.
already made those decisions.
That's right. Yeah. And I do know that was one tip that somebody had given me before about the transition between when I was working from home, the transition between, hey, you're at an office, you're sitting at your desk, but your family is 15 feet away in another room. Just having that 10 or 15 minutes of kind of resensitizing yourself to your family and kind of decompressing what you went through. And then again, kind of getting back some normal emotions and, some just, spouse emotions or whatever you need to do to get out of the work mode into the family mode. And just gives you kind of 5 or 10 or 15 minutes to just kind of get out of that. So,
yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So how can people reach you?
You can get me at alexishaselberger.com, which hopefully you'll put in the show notes. Nobody can spell my last name. But yeah, if people show up there, you can email me if you have questions. I also have a free downloadable guide for how to reduce distractions. So in any environment, which can be really helpful for people, especially right now.
Yeah, sounds good. And I'll put it in the show notes. But actually, I think your last name is actually easy to spell because there's no double letters.
That is true.
So everything is just exactly how it sounds with no double letters. So as soon as I saw that the first time, I thought this is actually an easy name to remember.
Oh, good. I guess, yes. But there's no U. Often people will spell it like I'm some kind of
burger.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. But good. I'm glad. But yes, no double letters.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Alexis. I really appreciate you coming and visiting with us and all the tips you had. And I think, again, it's been a few years since we talked, but I think things of time management doesn't always change, but it does change, based on what we're experiencing now for sure. And I think these tips hopefully will help the listeners and they can put this into their everyday use.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for having me on again. It was a really fun conversation.
Yeah, thanks, Alexis.